Hello, this is Dr. Harriet Fraad on Capitalism Hits Home, an interpersonal update. This is a show about the intersection of capitalism, class, and our personal lives. What's happening with men? Well, we need compassion for men. They're not just violent abusers. Men's gender training often forbids vulnerability, and everyone is vulnerable now. We're in the hands of leaders who don't care at all about anything but their profit. And men are trained not to seek comfort, not to seek solace outside of sex, and not to experience fear. And of course, men are in deep trouble and very scared. Their bonds, which are informal, women tend to talk to each other on the phone, to talk to each other intimately at work. Most women connect with other women. Even if you go to a woman's bathroom, some woman will come in and say to you as a stranger, "Ooh, do I look fat in this? Ugh, my boyfriend isn't talking to me." Men don't do that with other men. They bond informally through going to a bar together and having drinks, through watching sports together, either invited to their homes or at bars, through playing on teams, through bonding after work. Well, all those avenues are closed, so that men's opportunities to informally bond, which is so much easier for those trained not to need, are usually closed. Too often, men are trying to exert power over themselves. I think of football coaches shouting to the person who's tired and needs water, "What's the matter? You're on your period?" In other words, if you have needs, even for reasonable things like rest and water, you're acting like a girl, which in our male supremacist society is quite an insult. Tomboys are okay. Girlish boys are condemned. So there are all these traumas exerting themselves on men who have learned not to express their fear and their need. Unemployment, limited access to support systems. They've all been identified as family violence contributors. An indication of one of the things that men are doing to empower themselves in a sad way is that in the latest month of March, the latest month for which they had statistics, there's a 41% increase in buying guns, people buying guns. Because, of course, the president and his NRA buddies and females, I shouldn't make it only a female thing, his NRA cohorts have decided that buying a gun in the time of a pandemic is an essential task, which brings the number of gunshot victims in the emergency room competing with COVID victims for attention. We already have in America the most gun deaths in the world. Firearm injuries were 15% of even children's injuries. So that women, children, and men will be crowding into emergency rooms, exposed to COVID from the emergency room's other victims. What about children? Well, at 6 years old, child abuse goes way down because children are away at school for 6 hours a day, and when they come home, they can play with other kids either outside or in the hall or at someone else's house in a tenement where they know other kids. Now they're at home with parents. They're stuck at home with omnipotent people on whom they rely totally and who are in trouble themselves. Children live in 60% or more of households where domestic violence is perpetrated, and they're at risk of additional emotional and physical harm. This is worse now, with school and library and community center outlets and sports centers, playground centers. Children are likely to be spending much more time at home. And domestic violence abusers can target children as a way of furthering control over the household and over their own childhood selves who are needy and scared. Because people can control themselves through controlling other people, unfortunately. Researchers estimate that in households where domestic abuse happens to anyone, children have a 60% higher rate of risk of abuse and neglect than anywhere else. Even in good times, children die. 80.1% of the child murders, child deaths happen at home. And now things are a lot worse as people can't leave home. Add to this equation the diminishing operation of the courts to which women and children might have reached and gotten some help. Most of the mandated reporters of child abuse can't do it, so harm is elevated. The courts are clogged and can take only the most severe cases, leaving cases that were not total emergencies before the coronavirus untouched. So children can be unsafe at home. Other children can be stuck in precarious, dangerous placements. And a lot of parents who want to reunify and already can't reunify. The courts are minimal. Now, these are problems with a population being frightened for good reason. They are in the hands of an irresponsible leader. The coronavirus was known about. America was warned with the rest of the world by China in December of 1999. The successful countries immediately acted. Trump silenced the news. He didn't want the stock market to go down because he took credit for the inflated stock market and full employment, even at lousy wages. It was fuller employment, and he took credit for it. And he feared that that credit would be diminished, and with it, his electoral chances. So he has let at least 40,000 Americans die. Because the first mandate is to close the borders and to shelter at home. He didn't support that. He also didn't stockpile the vaccines or the COVID tests and the protective equipment and the life-changing equipment like ventilators. I'll go over that later. If we look at who did weather that crisis the most, what countries did what we didn't do? What did their leaders do that we didn't? The top countries that have eradicated coronavirus in their countries, 7 of the 9 of them, interestingly enough, are operated by women, but they are Germany under Angela Merkel, Taiwan, even though it's right across from China, over Tsai Ing-wen, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, Karen Jacobsdottir of Iceland, Sanna Marin of Finland, Erna Solberg of Norway, Mette Frederiksen of Denmark, Xi in China, and Miguel Diaz-Canel in Cuba. Why did they do so well, and why didn't we? Well, Unlike all those nations, we did not stockpile medical equipment, protective equipment, and medical gear that would save us. We did what was profitable for private capitalists. To stockpile for private capitalists is a lose-lose situation. The reason you accumulate goods is to turn them over and get the money. So keeping a lot of goods without selling them isn't profitable. That's why Trump pulled out of the World Health Organization's pandemic commission, took the money away, and sold our protective supplies. There were pictures in the newspaper and on the internet held up of the receipts from Trump's sale of COVID-19 equipment because the price went up. Who could resist such an opportunity? Katie Porter exposed it. Even though thousands of Americans would die, he made money. Because to make a profit is contradictory with taking care of the needs of the population. The other thing that those 9 countries did was immediately lock down. Lock down. They had the stockpiles of materials to stop the pandemic, to test, to treat, to isolate. And they did it. They also believe in science, unlike Donald Trump. They studied the science, and China helped all of them with the science they developed in their successful containment of the coronavirus in Wuhan, a city of 11 million people. They all have adequate housing stock so that they don't have thousands of people homeless. In the streets of New York, they have estimated that there are 66,000 people living. They also have educational systems that can help their populations learn adequately at home. And they don't threaten people with the loss of really needed things like electricity, like water, like supplies of oil, gas, solar power, wind power, etc. And they use their defense apparatus and their home security to make sure people are safe. We don't have any of those things. Trump did not lock down the borders. He let people fly in and out because that was more profitable for him. He didn't isolate people in their homes. There was a range of ways that people isolated in their homes, from Tsai Ing in Taiwan and New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, or Angela Merkel in Germany, made emergency pronouncements which their people obeyed. There were no political groups rebelling unless they were put down by the national defense people. That was not an allowable thing to endanger their people. So they declared emergency lockdown of their borders, no planes, trains, etc. in and out. And they made shelter at home orders. Jacinda Ardern said, we're all into this together. We all have to be kind to each other. We all have to shelter at home. China, which is an authoritarian society, welded people's doors shut, fed them through the windows, and would not let people leave in Wuhan. So what did we do wrong here? All of these other countries have the federal power to overwhelm the profit maker and makers and the big corporations that operate in their societies. An indication of this, of the power of alternatives in these societies, is the power of the socialist and communist metal workers unions that won a 22-hour work week this year in order to have work-life balance, and that was before Corona. All of these populations make their leaders understand that there are powerful socialist, communist, and even fascist forces that will replace the capitalists unless they cooperate. The United States doesn't have that. Anti-communism smashed the unions. Because we have to realize after FDR did all these socialistic things, like hire 11 million workers at decent jobs to do all the things we need to do, which is the equivalent of hiring 22 million now, and also created Social Security, created unemployment insurance, and all sorts of other possibilities for people. The capitalists wanted to make sure that didn't happen again so fast. And after the war, they were worried. Uncle Joe, that was Joe Stalin, was our biggest, most powerful ally during World War II. In addition, the communists and socialists were the spark in the CIO, a multi-million person union that was the biggest, most progressive force in the United States. So after the war, with the McCarthy era, they cooperated with the House of Un-American Activities and Joseph McCarthy in the Congress to declare that communism was treason. Anyone who espoused it was attempting to overthrow the United States government. And they hounded everyone on the left as an actual or suspected communist and blacklisted them. The socialists were hounded and blacklisted as fellow travelers to the communists. The CIO and AFL were persuaded to throw the communists and socialists out of their unions, and they were the spark in those unions. And so they became the kind of pork chop unions that we have often today. In the 50s, when this happened, 35% of American labor was organized in unions. Now it's between 7 and 9%. And the unions are much less militant. So, what could we do? Well, the first thing I think we can do is create a strong socialist presence of the kind Bernie was trying to do, and should be still, I think, and AOC and many others are trying to do in Congress and elsewhere. We need a universal public quality medical care system like they have in every other developed country of any means. In France, where I spent some time, when you're sick, you go to the doctor, he puts your or she puts your card in the machine, which sends a message to the government that this visit has been accomplished. The doctors and dentists get adequate and good pay, but nothing exorbitant like heart surgeons or brain surgeons get now. And the person gets nothing. No bills, no harassment. And if they had a long trip and petition for it, they can get their car fare back, their car fare to the doctor's office. I remember going to a dentist in France that has the kind of public health care that lots of people do. And the dentist said to me, I don't know what to charge for filling your cavity. I guess $15 would do it. That's what I assume. And I said, wow, $15? She said, yeah, that's about what it cost. Didn't take me long. That's a very different medical care system. And that medical care and life itself and health should not be left in private hands. Neither should food. Food production for the mass of people should be fresh, organic, affordable food. Organic food should not be reserved for those who have the money. and fresh organic food is not provided in many poor neighborhoods. So food production and distribution should not be a for-profit affair. Nothing that's a basic need should be for profit. And that includes housing too. People need shelter in safe places. They don't need to pay less rent because they have less money. They don't need to live next to the incinerator in a polluted area in low standard housing. Housing should be a basic need that is socially provided. Another basic need is education, which should be quality education for all. An educational idea that was so good it was never picked up was educational parks, which were big parks where all the kids were bussed in from the whole area, where there was a whole park with a little place for young children, place for elementary school children, middle school children, and high school students. And those children could be provided with the best quality education and materials collectively, so everyone would get an opportunity. Another thing that should be socialized, because everyone needs it, is the availability of clean water and clean energy of all sorts that is affordable, whether it's electric or solar or wind produced or gas or oil produced. And everyone should be protected by a military that's actually present for them, particularly in this crisis. We're now in 160 nations as our military, and we have lost or called it a draw with every nation with which we've had a war, except Grenada, who's about the size at most of Staten Island, very small. I think we can do these things. If we made those industries co-op industries, not for profit, we could do that. If people wanted greater profit, they could make luxury goods. They could make designer clothes. They could do all sorts of things. But those vital sectors should not be part of a profit system, because those that are in those sectors are thinking of making money for themselves. It doesn't pay to hire anybody in a capitalist system unless you're making more money for yourself than you're giving them. Profit is so much the bottom line that it's a legal commitment of corporations to serve their shareholders. We don't want only the shareholders served. We need the mass of people served in their most basic needs. If we had that, we, like those other nations, would be out from under this coronavirus. We would have our health. We would have our strength. People who are vulnerable to the coronavirus either have pre-existing conditions, many of which are untreated in our for-profit healthcare system, or they may be malnourished. The average American consuming a large bag of Cheetos has as much nutrition as a starving Nigerian child with its cup of lentils every day. So we need nutrition for everyone, safe, healthy nutrition, not only for the rich. And we need shelter and energy and water and education. And of course we can find a way. We can find a way. America has so many resources. We have been the richest country in the world, and we are the worst at protecting our citizens against coronavirus. We can change that. And we can change the disaster that has been inflicted by our government through its mishandling of the coronavirus, from which we all suffer. Thank you for listening. This episode has been brought to you by Democracy at Work. Please support our work. Visit our website at democracyatwork.info.